What if a 1,000-year-old Viking prophecy just decided what you'll click next? This long, sleepy documentary drifts from the Völuspá and staff-bearing völur to runes, oaths, dreams, and the great winter to come, then quietly follows those same patterns into modern defaults, algorithms, and the soft predictions that guide your day. But before we dive into it, if you enjoy myth told slowly and gently for sleep, please like this video, subscribe, and ring the bell so the next story finds you on time. Settle in now as the room grows calm and the kettle breathes. Imagine a seeress lifted to the high seat, a staff touching the floor, the Norns drawing water at the roots of the ash while the night listens, and somewhere between frost and fire you begin to hear how an old forecast becomes a habit, how a habit becomes a path, and how the path under your feet feels warm and familiar as the first lines of a story you somehow already know. They said the world began with a voice and a memory, a seeress summoned from the edges of time, speaking in the measured hush of the Völuspá, while Odin listened, and while you listen now, you can almost hear the loom of fate creaking softly in the dark. The Norns seated at the roots of the ash, drawing water from the well and smearing the trunk with white clay so the world would not split, weaving what was, what is, what may be, into threads that feel suspiciously like habit, routine, the little grooves of choice you slip into without quite noticing. In that old poem, the seeress folds the whole story of the cosmos into breath, from primordial frost to a winter of winters and a final fire, and already you sense the strange comfort of prophecy, the way a path described becomes a path desired, and a path desired becomes a path walked. In the north, prophecy wore boots and travelled. She arrived on farmsteads, when the sea ice held fast, when the larders thinned, when people wanted futures bundled and warmed like infants. They called her a völva, staff carrier, a woman whose garments rustled with beads and fur, whose wand shone like a slim iron constellation, whose songs rolled the mind sideways until the doorway of elsewhere cracked open. In Eirik's Saga Rautha, a famine brings one of these women to Greenland, and everyone gathers, men and women, Christian and pagan, hesitant and hopeful, as the seeress mounts a high seat and asks for the ward songs that loosen the world. If you crossed her path, you might have given her a ring, a stool, a spoon of warm heart's broth, because payment matters when truth is coaxed from silence. In the grave soil of Scandinavia, archaeologists still lift the staffs of such women, iron and intricate, lying beside rich garments, proof that prophecy was not a parlour trick, but status, office, and work. You might think this is all harmless theatre, a community staging its fears in ritual, but prophecy has teeth, and they are social. A forecast binds neighbours to a shared expectation, and shared expectation becomes coordination, and coordination becomes reality. If the völva promised fish next summer, boats were mended, nets repaired, seed silver saved for tar and rope. If she warned of strife, oaths were tightened, doors barred, the quick glance over the shoulder sharpened like a blade. In sagas and poems, the future is not a distant country, but a pressure in the room, shaping the hand that lifts the cup, the eye that scans the horizon. And you can feel it, the soft nudge of narrative that says, walk here, not there, breathe like this, not that, all while the tree drinks quietly from the well, and the night grows deeper around the ash. Letters bit into bone and wood, and the lines were not shy about meaning. A farmer's daughter sickens, a love-struck boy carves a clumsy charm on a whalebone and hides it under her pillow, and the sickness worsens until Egil Skallagrimsson, poet with a warrior's hands, reads the marks, scrapes them away into fire, and replaces them with a better spell, a reminder that symbols matter, that small crooked lines can tilt a life. Runic magic was not a parlour of neon crystals, but a craft with consequences, and the sagas treat it with a steady, practical respect. Carve well, or do not carve at all. Older still are the chips and slips, cleromancy, the habit of cutting fruit wood into marked pieces, casting them on a white cloth, and seeking the lean of chance. Tacitus describes it. A Roman watching northern hands sought signs from silence, and you can feel the ritual's gravity. When the lots fall, ill-omened people hold. They do not move that day. When the lots fall kindly, they proceed, but still double-check with birds and whispers and the tilt of smoke. It is bureaucracy by omen, a decision process with ceremony baked in, so that choice feels less lonely and perhaps more obedient. Now tilt your head and you see it. The same mechanism hums under modern skin. A teacher told to expect brilliance finds it blooming in a child because her attention waters what the paper predicted. A banker's score closes one door and opens another until the number becomes the person's weather. A prediction slips into your pocket as a notification, and your next tap makes the machine look impressively right. We gave this pattern a name in the last century, the self-fulfilling prophecy, and we tested its cousins in classrooms where high expectations raised performance like a tide. You would find very quickly that forecasts do not merely report, they recruit. And beneath those forecasts flow the quiet currents of choice architecture, the default box already ticked, the auto-renew already humming, the fruit placed at eye level, and the button painted the colour your thumb trusts. In experimental after experimental, the pre-selected option wins, not because it is sacred, but because inertia is warm, and the path of least resistance feels like fate in comfortable clothes. If a völva once sang you towards summer, a checkbox now sings you towards subscription. Not because you cannot defy it, but because prophecy, old or new, saves you the trouble of deciding. The North also whispered that a life does not walk alone. It moves with companions that seldom speak above a murmur, a fylgjur that shadows your steps, sometimes as woman in a dream, sometimes as an animal with your temperament tucked into its fur. A haming jar that is the family's luck, lent to a friend before a voyage, handed down like a bright heirloom no hand can see. Such ideas sound quaint until you notice how many of your choices answer to invisible company, to the reputation you carry, to the luck you think your household has, to the animal you are certain lives inside your name. The Norns sit, of course, still weaving, but their hands today are joined by others, by designers who arrange menus and sliders so you drift into the option that pleases the house, by recommenders that learn your patterns and return them to you dressed as destiny, by scores that say likely, unlikely, risky, prime, until you mistake probability for prophecy and preference for truth. Studies of defaults show how a pre-chosen path can capture multitudes, not by force, but by fatigue. A tired mind hears the ward song of the checkbox and nods. And tomorrow looks much like yesterday, which is precisely what fate always promised. You might think none of this applies to you, that your choices are Viking bold, hacked free by will alone. And yet your morning unfolds along threads you rarely see. The app you open first, the route you accept without checking, the way a forecast of rain changes not just your coat, but your mood, your pace, your plan to speak to a stranger at the tram stop. Viking prophecy was never only about gods and glaciers. It was about how stories and signs make scaffolds inside the head, how a whispered future tugs you gently toward itself. And somewhere in that gentle tug there is comfort, and somewhere there is danger, and somewhere a seeress raises her staff while the room grows very quiet, and you lean forward because you already know she is about to tell you something you were going to do anyway. In the long hush of a Greenland winter, they brought the future into the hall and set it on a high seat. A völva with bright beads and catskin gloves, her staff glinting as if it remembered stars, and the room tilting toward her as she asked for ward songs to loosen the air. In Eric's saga Rother, the little seeress Thorbjörg arrives when famine bites, and the people, Christian and pagan alike, circle close while Guðríður, who would rather not, lends her voice to the old melody called Varð Lokkur. The seeress breathes, speaks, and promises that scarcity will end, and that the young singer will marry well, and found a great line. You might think of it as a village counselling session, dressed in fur and ash, but the scene is careful, procedural, almost liturgical, a ceremony that turns fear into rhythm and rhythm into resolve. Archaeology keeps nodding along. In graves across Scandinavia lie the wands and iron staffs of women who dealt in futures, some as long as a child's height, some capped with little houses of bronze, many buried with foreign jugs and sacrificed animals, as if the world itself had paid their fee. The National Museum of Denmark even points to the famous woman from Firecat, rested with a staff and a small purse of henbane seeds, a plant whose smoke can tilt the mind toward vision, and notes that Oseberg held cannabis seeds with objects linked to seeresses. Völva, staff carrier, a title forged in iron and ritual, and the graves whisper that prophecy in the Viking Age was not fringe but office, paid in silver and ore. Older than staffs are slips of wood and the quiet drift of chants. Tacitus, patient Roman on the Rhine, describes how northern hands cut twigs from a nut-bearing tree, marked them with signs, scattered them on a white cloth, and drew 3, one by one, with eyes on the sky and a prayer on the tongue. If the reading soured, all paused for that day. If it sweetened, they moved. But checked again with other omens. A bureaucracy of fate that feels strangely familiar, like a calendar alert you obey without asking why. Lots and leaves telling a household when to dare and when to hold. A governance by sign as practical as any ledger, and threaded through it all are runes that behave like tools. Egil Skallagrimson bends over a girl wasting away and finds clumsy lines scratched on whalebone, a charm meant for love that has soured into illness. He scrapes the runes, burns the bone, carves better signs, and health returns with the calm of a well-placed word, which is to say that symbols could bruise as easily as they could bless, and that writing, in that cold light, was never merely ink on a page, but a way the future leaned against a body and made it move. Part 5. Dreams in the sagas walk like neighbours. In Jarl's saga, a vision comes before the famous burning, a pressure of omens and portents that gather the men of Iceland like weather gathers at a ridge, until fire takes Bergthorshvoll, and the air tastes of smoke and law. The pages carry both the dream and the deed, as if bound by one thread, and you can almost feel how foresight breeds preparation, and preparation makes the path easier to tread. Gisli Surson meets 2 women in sleep, one dark and one bright, and they become companions who promise and warn, measuring his remaining years with the calm cruelty of accurate clocks. He trusts, resists, trusts again, and you see how a forecast, once lodged under the ribs, begins to steer the hand on the oar and the eyes in the dusk. Not because the dream forces him, but because the mind, offered a map, prefers to follow a line that already exists. Even the gods move by this logic. Snorri tells that Freyja first taught Seiðr the difficult magic of seeing and shaping, and that Odin learned it too, despite the murmurs that such arts were unmanly. If you crossed his path, you might have found a wanderer who traded an eye for knowledge and cared more for outcomes than dignity, which is a way of saying that even at the highest seat, prophecy was not a toy but a technology, risky to wield, irresistible to those who feared being surprised by tomorrow. And all of it keeps circling the old lesson, that pronouncements do not merely sit on shelves like carved stones. They hum, they recruit allies, they lean on conduct until conduct leans back. A village hears that luck will turn, and they mend their nets. A household hears that trouble is coming, and the latch sits tighter at night. And in that soft, quiet tightening, the future finds the shape it was offered. Part 6. Modern speech has new names for these old forces. The self-fulfilling prophecy, for instance, a phrase Robert Merton popularized to capture how a belief can midwife its own truth. Say a bank is tottering, and watch depositors make it so. Say a child is gifted, and watch attention and patience collect around them like a cloak. Prophecy here is not magic, only feedback, but feedback is often enough. Classrooms made the point famous and then argued over it. Rosenthal and Jacobson told teachers to expect bloomers and found gains that thrilled the world. Then, decades of replication and critique trimmed the claims and made the effect smaller, subtler, but still there. Expectations shift time given, warmth offered, questions repeated, and so tiny, repeated nudges turn into different afternoons. Even a weak enchantment can matter when it is daily. Defaults are prophecy's quiet cousins. Set the box to yes, and many people will carry that yes forward for years. In organ donation studies, a pre-selected consent raised rates dramatically, while in savings plans, a switch to automatic enrollment pulled participation up by dozens of percentage points and held many workers at the company's chosen contribution and fund. The lesson is homely and sharp. Leave a path open and lit, and feet will find it at dawn. And then there are the oracles in your pocket. Recommender systems that learn what you loved yesterday and serve it back tomorrow, narrowing choice into comfort until preference feels like destiny. Scholars argue over the size of the filter bubble, but even short exposures can bend what you see, and what you see bends what you do. The old Norns sit at the root, and the new ones hum in code, yet both make tomorrow look conveniently like today, unless you wade upstream. You might think you are far from prophecy when you tap to skip a song or let a route populate on a small blue map, but the shape of that choice was drafted elsewhere. The slip drawn from a virtual bowl, the ward song sung by a design team, the rune of a default carved into a form, and in the quiet of that recognition, with the room dim and the hour late, you can almost hear a staff touch the floor and a soft voice remark that the path you are on is one you chose, and also one that was chosen for you. They say the first shiver came as a dream that would not loosen its hold, Baldr waking pale and wordless. And in that midnight hush, you can almost hear the family of gods turning their faces toward what had already begun. In the old lay Baldr's drama, Odin saddles Sleipnir and rides down the cold road to hell to ask the dead what the dream means, and a dog with a bloody chest bars his way before the earth opens like a mouth. Prophecy is not a luxury in this moment. It is triage. It is the lamp brought to the bedside when the patient stirs and will not speak, and when a voice from beneath tells him the funeral hall is ready, the beds spread, the drinking horns polished for a guest with a gentle brow, he knows that the kindness everyone loves will be the first thing winter takes. So, Frigg moves as mothers move when storms gather. She takes oaths from iron and stone and fire and water, and all the creatures that wander, begging them to leave her son untouched. The gods then make a circle, and hurl weapons at the one who cannot be hurt and laugh when they fall like rain on a calm sea. You might think this is hubris, but it is also ritualized relief, a way of keeping the dread at bay. Yet a single softness is overlooked, a small sprig that seemed too young to be asked for a promise. And a clever mouth hears this and fashions the neatest little spear. It takes only the blind brother's hand and the trickster's careful aim for inevitability to become an afternoon. And as Baldr falls, you can feel how a prophecy, once spoken aloud, begins to draw people into its choreography until even grief keeps time. After the pyre and the ship and the smoke that clings to every cloak, after the journey to hell with pleas and weeping and a single refusal that seals the bargain shut, the lesson hangs in the air like frost. Foreknowledge breeds action. Action breeds consequence. The future is not a blank field, but a path worn by many feet, and some of them are yours. You might think this is only a god's problem, wrapped in gold and myth, but the mechanism is familiar. When a family believes a danger is coming, they board the doors and sharpen their guard. When a village believes luck will turn, they mend their nets, and fish leap into baskets that would otherwise have stayed on the wall. In that sense, Baldr's Doom is not just a story about loss. It is a story about coordination, about how people, given a sketch of tomorrow, will try to lean it into a kinder shape, and sometimes, without meaning to, harden the very line they feared. And in the dimness where prophecy and preparation touch, you can almost hear the soft clack of runes, the sigh of a mother, the scrape of a knife trimming a green twig smooth. Elsewhere and earlier, the seer's work looks like careful craft. The völva does not burst into a hall like thunder. She is seated high and respectfully, staff in hand, beads at her throat, the household gathered with the kind of attention usually saved for law. In Eirik's saga Rautha, the little prophetess, Thorbjorg, asks for women who can shape the ward songs that loosen the air, and when Guthríðr lends her clear voice, the room itself seems to breathe easier. The procedure is patient and elaborate, the hush punctured only by melody, and what emerges is not a riddle tossed to the wind, but a schedule for hope famine will ease. Voyages will succeed, and you would find very quickly that a community can move like one body when given a forecast it trusts. Archaeology backs the posture of that high seat with iron and ash. Across Scandinavia lie the strange staffs from women's graves, some topped with fittings like tiny houses, some long as a child, their tips worn as though they touched the floor many times. At Firkat, a woman was laid to rest with such a staff and a little purse of henbane seeds, a poisonous plant whose smoke is famous for tilting the mind toward vision. In some burials, miniature chairs appear, small tokens of the platform from which a seeress might work, as if the furniture of foresight had to be carried forward with the dead, all of which suggests that prophecy here was not a parlour trick, but an office with tools, techniques, and a fee to match the risk. The craft spills into the literature like ink in water. There are runes, scratched by clumsy hands, that sour a girl's health until Eagle reads them, scrapes them from whalebone into fire, and carves better signs that set her right. There are dreams that arrive as visitors, one bright and one dark, telling an outlaw the shape of his remaining years and turning sleep into counsel. There are omens that collect ahead of a burning, as if the future cannot help announcing itself when it is close. And in each tale you can feel the same underlying logic, that information about tomorrow rearranges today's furniture, even when no one commands it to do so. Seiðr itself sits in a complicated light. The sources say Freyja brought this art to the Aesir, and that Odin learned it despite the murmurs that such work was unmanly, a breach in the stiff weave of gender that kept households tidy and reputations intact. Loki will throw the word for shame across a hall like a dart and hit Odin with it, which tells you less about magic than about the costs of stepping sideways from one's assigned posture. And yet the gods want the power to see and shape, and mortals will always pay to borrow a little of that vision. So the staff is lifted, the chant poured out, and another small nudge is given to a future someone already half believes in. The same care that dresses a völva and raises her seat can be traced in the way people handled chants. Roman eyes watching the north wrote of twigs cut from nut trees, scored with signs, cast on white cloth, drawn 3 at a time with a prayer and a glance at the sky. If the lot soured, plans paused. If they sweetened, action followed, but not without more checking. Bureaucracy, you might say with a smile, existed long before ink, and every household, given the right trembling in the gut, knew how to turn uncertainty into ritual so that fear became a rhythm you could breathe to. And then the world tilts. Churches take root. Laws thicken. The old practices move from centre to edge, and finally to the seam where memory frays. Sagas remember the staff and the song, but clerks begin to frown at certain rites, and the gendered suspicions around Seiðr harden into a language of shame. Lokasenna keeps a record of the insult, Snorri notes the discomfort, and you can feel the negotiation between usefulness and stigma. A community still wants someone to speak to the fog of tomorrow, yet it learns to whisper about who sits on the platform and at what cost to their name. Even so, the instruments remain ready to hand. The high seat becomes a bench by a hearth. The ward song becomes a lullaby you hum without thinking. The staff is any object you touch when you need the courage to choose. And while the temples fall and the law codes grow stern, people still cast their private lots. They ask friends what the winter will be like. They read the look on a neighbour's face and call it omen. They move as their grandparents moved when the wind shifted. And the path ahead, which seemed to belong only to gods and poets, is made again out of small, repeated choices that trace the shape someone once described in smoke and ash. The law spoke in the north, with a voice that had learned patience. The thing gathered men in a ring of wind and voices, and at its centre stood the law speaker, a living archive who recited the code from memory like a slow river. Oaths sealed bargains there, hands closed on an iron ring that lived in the temple or the chieftain's hall, and the words were not small. To swear was to braid your future into the rope of the community. You might think such gatherings were all noise and pride, but underneath pulsed an almost liturgical caution. Auspicious timing mattered. A storm read as a sign could delay a hearing. A raven circling at the right moment could reassure a nervous claimant. and everyone understood that a public promise, set before witnesses and sky, had a way of fulfilling itself, because no one wished to be the loose plank on the bridge. Skalds drifted among these rings of decision, like weather with a memory. Poets who minted reputations in real time, praising restraint here and daring there, so that a leader listening to verse could hear tomorrow's opinion already forming. Prophecy is not only a woman with a staff, it is also the social pressure of a song. A verse that names you generous makes your hand open next winter. A stanza that considers you wolfish sharpens your smile into something kinder, and in these soft adjustments the future nods, grateful for the help. Households kept their own calendars of omen and habit. The first fish, pulled from the spring net, told them whether to set more hooks. The way a foal stood at birth coloured the season's marriages. A silver coin tucked into a shoe for a voyage became not just comfort, but protocol. And protocol, repeated, feels like fate. Even names walked with intention. A child, given a grandfather's name, carried his heimingjur like a bright cloak, and neighbours who believed in that brightness made room for it in their dealings. So a baby's future arrived, braided to a history that everyone agreed to see. Prestige flowed as predictably as rivers do in Thor. Gift-giving promised return, and return, once expected, usually came. The more a chieftain's hall grew famous for open benches and hot stew, the more likely travellers would choose it first, strengthening the very renown that drew them. A feedback loop, disguised as hospitality. And if you listened closely at the hearth, you could hear the small prophecies that keep a society together. His doors will be open, her word will hold, their kin will answer the call. Ordinary foresight, wearing everyday clothes, and quietly deciding what the next morning would look like when the fog unrolled and the gulls began to cry at the shore. Sea roads took their courage from omens and craft that tasted like prophecy to tired eyes. A sailor might test the wind with a wetted finger and feel, with a conviction that lived under the ribs, whether the day would lift them or fold them back into harbour. Cloud bellies taught the temper of the air. The colour of the sea at dawn hinted at a mood that could turn oars to lead by noon. You would find very quickly that long familiarity becomes divination's cousin. Pattern recognition wrapped in ritual phrases, the kind a helmsman mutters as if invoking luck when he is really reading a page only he can see. Birds were maps with feathers. Flocks turning a certain way at a certain hour meant land not far off. And there is that old tale of a settler testing the world with ravens, letting one fly east and another west, watching which returned and which did not, as if the sky could answer in black geometry. Even a piece of driftwood became a sentence to the experienced. Its weed and worm told of currents and coasts. A kelp-fringed beam could say more, in the right hands, than a heap of charts. In the dark belly of the ship, beneath the tar smell and the bundle of spare line, lived the small household omens that made danger bearable. A carved figurehead meant to startle what lurked. A coin under a mast step. A fragment of bone cut with a protective mark and tied where salt would not rot it. These weren't grand magic, but promises to the self, tiny vows that steadied hands on cold mornings. And when a crew believed themselves favoured, their work quickened and their judgment grew supple, and the sea, which answers best to attention, obliged more often than not. Harbours received sailors like old friends when the signs smiled. A certain shop door opened, a certain ale was poured, A familiar scold lifted his voice and braided voyage into verse until risk turned into story and story into renown. Reputation moved ahead of men like weather fronts, and merchants adjusted prices and patience to the legend they expected, which is a long way of saying that prediction, even when poured from mugs and mouths, changes the balance of a day. A rate offered, a cargo trusted, a quarrel avoided, because the chorus already knows the ending and prefers a gentler tune for the night that lies waiting beyond the lamplight. Over all of this, like winter stars, sharp enough to hear, hung the largest prophecy of all, that the ash would tremble, that bonds would snap, that a wolf's jaw would open wider than fear, and a serpent's coil would squeeze the horizon until ships slid from their cradles, that a horn would sound from a watcher's throat, and the fields of heaven would ring like iron. Ragnarök was not only catastrophe, but curriculum. It taught how to live when you know the end is scheduled. It taught a steadiness that keeps the hand from shaking at the threshold, and it taught an appetite for honour that finds its reason not in victory, but in refusing to be late for the fight. The sayings collected in cold halls reminded listeners that all bright things meet their dusk. Cattle die, kinsmen die, and you too will go the way of grass. Yet a name can live, a deed can throw its shadow forward, and suddenly you see how inevitability breeds a certain generosity. If fortune will fade, spend it while it can still warm the room. If strength will stiffen and break, use it now, where it saves a neighbour or keeps a promise. Prophecy here is not a leash, but a lantern, showing the shortness of the path, so that feet choose it awake. And even the ending could not help, including a sprout, a green field lifting from those ashes, a hall with gold tiles where good speech sits as thick as bread, two humans stepping out of dew and morning to begin again. The story closes the fist and then opens it, which is exactly how people behave when they plan beyond themselves. Planting orchards they will not see in full fruit, teaching children songs they will never hear, sung back, writing law for descendants whose names they cannot guess. An optimism housed inside the acceptance of winter, a grammar in which doom and hope can share a sentence and come away friends. You might think none of this touches your thumb hovering over a glowing button at midnight, and yet a forecast just sent to your screen is busy adjusting your tomorrow. A report that winter will be hard nudges you to buy salt and patience. A model of storm, or market, or health leans your schedule into a shape you will call common sense. And somewhere in your chest, older than your name, the habit of listening to the future quiets your breathing and makes you ready to meet what comes. Not because you bowed to fate, but because you learned the old northern trick of hearing the ending and deciding how to walk toward it with your shoulders set and your gaze soft as snow. Reputation in the north could be hammered like iron, and it could be sung like linen, but it could also be nailed to a hillside so that every passerby felt its spell. A neath pole raised with a carved head and cruel runes was more than an insult. It was a public forecast of failure, a curse that said your luck would wither and your friends melt away, and your farm remember you only as a stain in the hayfield. Once planted, such a thing recruited witnesses and made collaborators of rumour, and you might think of it as a medieval press release whose headline bent tomorrow. Merchants hesitated. Strangers steered wide. Even kin felt the tug to be elsewhere when your name was spoken. Prophecy here took the shape of communal expectation, and the body, wary of standing alone against a crowd's prediction, adjusted its path without admitting why. Oaths worked with the same quiet leverage. When a hand closed on an iron ring in a chieftain's hall and the words came slowly, the sentence did more than bind the tongue. It scaffolded future choices so that the honourable answer would be the easy one. This is how societies make self-fulfilling prophecies that are mostly kind. Say aloud that a man keeps his word, and he will find himself keeping it because there are eyes on him, and he prefers to inhabit the praise already spent. Name a woman, a peace weaver, and you feel how her council house grows warmer, and her gifts travel further because guests arrive expecting warmth. Titles in that world were not ornaments. They were forecasts that people politely brought to life. Even insults were prescriptive. Call a man Agra, and you aimed not only to humiliate, but to predict a posture others would punish. To dodge that fate, he might ride out before dawn, stir up witnesses, force a duel, or drown the room in gifts until the talk curled away. A bad name was not just a report. It was a suggested itinerary for your neighbours, and you moved quickly to reroute it. Somewhere under the fur and iron you can hear the mechanism you know so well. Reputational scores, star ratings, whispered references. Each a little prophecy about how an encounter will go. Each a hand on the tiller of a day you thought was yours alone. And once prophecy moves into furniture and habit, it becomes hard to see. A carved Thor's hammer, worn at the throat in the conversion years, said protect me, and also said you can trust me to act as those who wear this sign act. A small cross, glinting in the same place, murmured similar promises from another choir. Both were objects, yes, but also promissory notes that made people who met you treat you as if you already belonged to a story they recognized. And because belonging is comfortable, you answered by behaving like the person they had been led to expect, which is how little emblems quietly shepherd tomorrow, while the snow sifts down and the cattle breathe white into the morning. Prophecy in seafaring begins with sight, but matures into ritual. The sky is red, the swells are counted. The grit on the tongue says something about rain, and then the readings are wrapped in practices that make the reading stick, a coin under the mast step to promise safe return. A blessing muttered when the keel kisses water. A sequence of tasks at departure done in the same order so that chance will find the deck familiar. The helmsman knows he is managing nerves, yet the crew feels steadier, and steadiness shapes decisions when fog presses close. So the right, like a soft-spoken navigator, shifts the track by a degree that matters a day later. Some spoke of sunstones that find the sun when cloud and spray make liars of the sky. A crystal turned until a glow aligns, and a course can be trusted even at the lip of storm. Whether you carry that exact shard, or only the habit of checking light with something more honest than your eyes, the deeper point holds. Tools that claim to reduce uncertainty invite obedience. A promise of orientation draws your feet forward, and in the relief of thinking you know where you are, you stop challenging the line you've drawn. Maps, compasses, app icons buzzing with tiny forecasts, all cousins of the same desire to make tomorrow legible enough that today can be quiet. On land, the same appetite rearranged farms and friendships. A favourable reading from a staff-bearer could schedule a marriage for midsummer and reweave the kinship map of a fjord. A sour one might delay a voyage long enough that a squall arrives and passes without your hull learning its language. None of this is lightning. It is simple math done with feelings and faith. A credible prediction shifts 5 decisions by a finger's width, and the world you build from those 5 decisions becomes a town where different children are born and different old stories are remembered by the hearth. And perhaps you can feel it in your morning routine, in the way a weather alert turns your step toward the tram earlier than usual and sets off a line of small timings that end with you meeting a voice you were always going to like. And because people are tender around their tomorrows, practitioners defended methods with tidy seriousness. The völva's high seat, the ward songs, the staff placed just so, the helmsman's check of sail and leech, and telltale taught by a father who learned from his. These are less about drama than about reproducibility. The ritual's attempt to be a laboratory. Do it this way, in this order, with these witnesses, and you will at least have the comfort of having done it right. Which, to a mind staring at a dangerous horizon, can feel indistinguishable from being right. And the difference between those two feelings is exactly where prophecy finds its grip. When settlers pushed west until the whale road frayed and birds became the only maps worth reading, one man sent ravens from his ship, watch them fly. Watch one wheel back with a core like a compass. Feel the crew lean toward the direction a feathered scout preferred. This is navigation as divination, and also divination as practical ethology. The birds know where land is because bodies know before minds do. Your hand has done this too, when it turned a corner because a crowd flowed there. When it selected the recommended route because the line on the screen looked calmer. A flock is a prophecy given form, and we follow it because no one likes to be alone with a guess. Villages then grew where those guesses ended in sweetness. A stream that offered trout, a slope that took well to barley, a beach that made friends with the wind, and quickly the first season's luck became the next decade's expectation. This valley yields. That headland bites boats. Such talk hardens into custom, and custom is a net that catches choice without breaking its ribs. You still have freedom. You simply tend to use it inside the lines drawn by last year's stories. Somewhere in that gentle capture, you can hear the logic that runs from omen to infrastructure. A prediction becomes a habit, becomes a road that is cheaper to walk than to ignore. Modern life has swapped staffs for dashboards, but the choreography is old. A bank model breathes likelihood into your file, and doors open or stay shut. A clinic's triage score points you toward one waiting room and away from another. A phone suggests what you meant to type, and you become, letter by letter, the person the keyboard thinks you are. None of this is a hex. It is attention trained by yesterday's data. Yet it feels like listening to a seer because it reduces the loneliness of deciding. You might think you are above it until a tiny badge tells you that you are 2 steps short of closing a circle, and your feet obey the circle, because completion is a prophecy that pays with a small bright chime. The North always kept a tenderness for those who tried to meet foretold ends with style. The farmer who hears that a bad winter will come and slaughtered early so the few might eat much. The warrior who knows a field will close over him and still polishes his helm because beauty is a kind of answer. The mother who whispers to the cradle, not that the child will be spared sorrow, but that he will meet it awake. This is the gift inside all the grim talk. Not resignation, but rehearsal. Not surrender, but practice breathing in rhythm with an approaching shape. Until when it arrives, you are already moving with it, like a ship cutting cleanly into a swell that rose a long way off and told you, if you were listening, how it wished to be met. Under the ash, the wells gleam. one holds memory, one wisdom, one sour with sacrifice. And at their rims sit three who never sleep, turning water into thread until the skein of days lies obedient across their knees. When the old poems speak of the Norns, they do it with the hush given to weather, not thunder, which dazzles, but the slow grey drift that makes a coastline and wears a mountain. You might think of them when your day follows grooves you swear you did not choose, when your feet find the old tiles from bed to kettle to door, as if each square had a soft magnet in it. The North, in telling of such weavers, was not only staging gods, it was explaining the felt experience of habit, the way yesterday tutors today without words. Runes, too, trained the eye to notice cause living inside sign. The rune poems do not sermonize so much as associate a cow's abundance for fey, an ash's firm frame for ass, hail as cold grain that melts into water and nourishes. Each stanza a mnemonic that slides from meaning to material to consequence, until a character carved in wood looks less like a letter and more like a compact with reality. Carve wisely and the world answers. Carve foolishly and the world answers differently. And in that moral physics, you can feel how marks on a stick prepare the mind to hear prophecy as simply the world being consistent with itself. Archaeology carries this literacy into the noise of ordinary life. Combs and whetstones and scraps of antler whisper with scratched messages, love notes, tally marks, little prayers smuggled into the grain. In markets and shipyards, on doorposts and toy swords, the lines stitched themselves into habit until even a child learned to trust the comfort of a symbol that promised an outcome. A name carved on a chest makes it hard for a thief to imagine new ownership. A charm at the eaves makes a cottager sleep easier, and easier sleep means steadier work, which is its own kind of blessing. If you listen closely, you can hear the thin edge where inscription meets intention, and intention becomes a path someone else will call fate. Song kept pace with all this, offering forecasts wrapped in memory. A refrain can prescribe as gently as it entertains. Praise a host for open benches, and, next winter, the benches are open because the verse already said they were. Mock a miser, and, next market day, his fingers soften to prove the poet's wrong. Skaldic poetry is difficult on the page, but simple in the hall. It is a weather report of reputation, and reputation is just prophecy that has learned to shake hands. So a man walks out after hearing what he is called and tries to match it, and his trying helps the song become true, and the day after that he tries a little less because the song has taken root, and the week after that it is the village that moves to meet the verse, because villages, like a melody, they can hum while carrying wood through the dusk. In all of it, the quiet lesson repeats. A future described often enough will be mistaken for a future required, and the difference is hard to feel when the description is kind, when it keeps you safe, when it unknots the braid of too many choices into one that feels light in the hand, which is why the staff glints softly on the high seat and the room leans forward without being told, and why your thumb hovers over a button that promises not the best outcome but the easiest, and in the moment of choosing the ease feels like truth, because it sounds so much like the ward song you learned in rooms, warmed by people who loved you and planned, as best they could, to make your tomorrows gentle. Standards went to war with prophecies fluttering from their hems. The raven banner, black and bright-eyed, promised victory to the chief who bore it and danger to the hand that held the pole. Men believed this with the particular seriousness reserved for things tested in pain, when bearers fell and the battle still swung their way, memory knit those moments into lore. When bearers lived and the tide turned, memory argued, as memory does, until the rule fit the story the clan preferred to tell. Either way, by dawn the banner had arranged tomorrow's courage, because men expected it to, and expectation sharpens the will, like a whetstone pulled through wool. Kings made their calendars with dreams. A pale horse stepping into sleep meant trouble. Saga pages carry these images like pressed flowers, and you can feel how a ruler, told a certain image will mean a certain turn, begins to manage counsel as if that turn had already started. He moves men to the ridge, where the omen says advantage will bloom. He avoids the ford that sleep said would swallow hooves. And the army. Watching a leader act with that unteachable steadiness prophecy lends firms around him the way clay firms when heat is sure and even. Beyond the cold capes, Varangian steel caught glints of a different sun, and even there the old habits travelled. A man who had heard in youth that his luck was strong would stand closer to the emperor, and closer still to danger, because to live up to one's Heiminger was sweeter than sleep. Pay followed, and tales followed pay, and soon the story of a fortunate guard grew heavier than the man himself, and drew to him chances that would have missed another. So, a reputation born in a fjord worked like a magnet in a marble city, and you can hear the moral without the sermon. Call a person lucky long enough, and the world will collaborate, slightly, to make room for the luck to prove itself. Even defeats learn to speak in the language of foresight. A loss could be filed under an old warning, and thus made bearable. The law was consulted, and the kin of those who walked under the raven's wing were reminded to choose banner bearers from a line that had already proven it could pay the price. This selective memory is not hypocrisy, but one of the ways communities keep moving. Weave yesterday's pain into tomorrow's advice, and you have, in a small way, defanged the pain. It becomes counsel, and counsel is easier to carry in a boat or on a winter road, where a snapping sound in the dark will make any man grateful for something to repeat between his teeth like a charm. You might think such warlike auguries belong to a world of iron and hawks, not to phones and trains, but count the talismans of your own contests. A shirt worn on the day of success that becomes a quiet uniform. A playlist that makes your hands remember how to be sure. A phrase from a mentor that you recite before stepping into a room where you will be measured. These are raven banners in soft cloth. They say you will not be alone. They say your hands will remember. And because you believe them, they are not wrong. And because they are not wrong, you keep them. And because you keep them, tomorrow inches toward the outline they drew when you were too busy breathing to notice. When the bells came, they did not erase the old threads so much as weave over and through them. Baptismal water pooled where ward songs had once loosened the air. Relics took the place of staffs in the corner of a room, and men who had been careful with omens learned to be careful with saints' days and fasts. Consulting calendars that were as prescriptive as any lot, prophecy did not vanish. It changed its grammar. A homily about harvest promised that charity would draw down favour, and the promise, believed, filled benches with food and doors with guests, which fed bodies and reputations both, which meant favours were indeed more likely to arrive. The loop closed, as loops like to do, and no one minded because the outcome tasted good. Law tilted with the new rites. Old bands on certain night wanderings, and muttered crafts hardened. Certain forms of seiðr took on the chill of sin, and the officiants stepped more carefully, if at all. And yet the mind's appetite for a sketch of tomorrow could not be starved. Dreams were written down with a cleaner script. Visions were routed through saints who knew how to stand before councils. The pendulum of legitimacy swung, and practitioners learned to hang their tools behind respectable curtains. A rune became a prayer when traced slowly enough. A charm became a blessing when spoken beneath a painted figure. The effect on choice was the same. An anxious mother reached for whatever arrangement of words would let her work through the night and believe dawn would be kind. Farmers, who have always been the most practical of mystics, kept their almanacs like scripture: moon for planting, sign for shearing, a redness at sunset that meant barley would dry if you laid it then. These were not superstitions to people who ate what their hands could coax from weather. They were distilled experience, pinned to saints' names to make them easier to remember. If your grandfather said the third day after a certain feast was good for moving a hive, you tried it. And when it worked once, you tried it again. And when it failed, you forgave it, because most prophecies are allowed a modest margin of error if they came from a voice you trust. So, habit survived doctrine and wrote next season's errands in a tidy list you could follow half asleep. And in the towns that grew like reefs around harbours, prophet learned to speak in the future tense. A merchant promised arrival before frost, and then hired risk away with extra hands and a better sail. And because he had promised he spent, and because he spent the ship moved, and because the ship moved the promise made sense. Prophecy by contract is what we call it now, and you can feel the old comfort in its modern cut. Write a delivery date, and a dozen decisions reorganize themselves to make the date true. Write a performance target, and whole departments begin to breathe at the tempo of that number. Bells or no bells, saga or spreadsheet, the mechanism is as steady as a tide that slips in under moonlight and lays its cool hand on the pilings, without ever asking who built the pier. The ink that fixed the old poems to calfskin also fixed a way of listening. Monastic hands copied the Völuspá and the sagas, with care that smelled of tallow and winter apples, and with each careful line, the oral future, once sung in smoky halls, learned to live in margins and glosses. A prophecy that had floated like breath now nested in vellum, and readers began to treat it as one treats law, consultable, steady, companionable on bad nights. The 13th century placed the great stories into the long memory of books, and a people who had once leaned close to a staff and a tune began leaning close to a page and a lamp, finding in its steady light the same quiet permission to plan and endure. The voice of a seeress unrolled like ribbon across columns, and if you traced it with a fingertip, you felt the same alternating warmth and chill that had kept an earlier generation awake until dawn. Later centuries braided new habits with the old ones. On doorposts hung primstavs, wooden calendars whose carved marks told a year's tasks the way a kindly elder does. A bird for the day to move hives, a rake for haying, a boat to bless nets and patch hulls before the sea remembered to be temperamental. Each mark looked backward to weather learned in pain and forward to work that would be done as if foreseen. You might think of these as domestic prophecies, sturdy and modest, that arranged chores into a rhythm smoother than luck. When the primstav said, "It was time," the time arrived, and households that followed its grain found themselves slightly more likely to meet winter with a pantry that did not complain. Not all foreseeing was benign. The early modern chill brought trials that turned anxious talk into firelight on faces too pale. And in Finnmark and elsewhere, the wind off the Barents carried rumours that could curdle into verdicts. Night wanderings and strange herbs drew scrutiny, and the old craft of seiðr was reframed as a neighbour's malice given wings. Prophecy's social engine was still at work, only now it ran on fear. A forecast of harm gathered witnesses the way a bright tune gathers dancers, and soon the fear's choreography became law, and law became punishment. And the village learned a different lesson about how stories steer hands. You can hear it if you listen past the snow in those records. A tremor that says the hunger to name tomorrow can be turned until it points at someone and does not let go. Yet, under the sternness and the smoke, ordinary life was faithful to its small foreknowings. Fishermen still read cloud bellies and the ruffle on a fjord to hear whether nets wanted mending before dawn. Farmers still tied a certain charm at lambing, not because the bishop approved, but because grandmothers did, and lambs are too tender to argue with tradition. And families still told tales in which dreams warned and blessings arrived by way of a quiet woman who set her staff against the floor and smiled as if she recognized you. Books sat on shelves now, and clergy wrote calendars with saints' days tucked neatly beside planting. But the old appetite for a corridor of light into tomorrow stayed close, steady as breath, ready to shape chores and choices in whatever language the century allowed. Even the way children learned to count contained a whisper from the north. Rune rhymes turned letters into omens, and animals into advice, and a generation that traced those shapes with bone pens and patient lips learned a kind of predictive grammar. This means that. Therefore, do this. And so, when they stood in markets 50 years later, they heard the same pattern in a merchant's promise and an alderman's oath. They recognized how a picture of next harvest, well drawn, makes hands move in time with it, how a rumour of scarcity loosens purses out of prudence, how a town can find itself living inside a forecast without ever once announcing that it has chosen to believe it. And, somewhere outside the window, the sea kept its counsel while the moon lifted, thin as a knife laid flat, and the primstav's marks waited for morning fingers to pass over them and listen. Then came an age that turned again toward the old songs with a different hunger. Scholars in wool and ink lifted Snorri like a lantern through libraries and told Europe that here was a treasury of northern thought, cool and strong as water from rock. Translators carried the seeress's voice across borders until her syllables rustled the curtains of parlours far from fjords. Painters found her in their pigments, and composers borrowed thunder for stages where horns and shadows made gods feel close again. Prophecy shifted disciplines, becoming an aesthetic as well as a guide, and people, lulled by music and moved by oil on canvas, felt the familiar tug that stories exert when they carry themselves like weather. National dreams tested their weight on these old beams. An island that kept its sagas like heirlooms found in them, a spine for independence, and in long winter evenings men and women read their own names in the lineages a völva once praised. Prophecy here became identity, a future described not merely in dates and deeds, but in the tone of a people's speech and the angle of its shoulder against storm. A gentle paradox followed. To imagine a fate together is to begin acting as if it were already coming true. And towns discovered that museums and schools, and quiet acts of stubborn hospitality, can be built from verses that say, "You are the kind of people who build museums and schools, and practice hospitality without drama." The century that followed showed how oracles can be misused when hunger runs cruel, Myths were stripped for symbols by hands that preferred iron to nuance, and banners borrowed ravens without the old humility that understood such signs to be warnings as much as promises. It is an old risk that attends any powerful story. A forecast, if shouted loudly enough, will collect obedience that looks like allegiance. And obedience, once collected, will claim justification in the very order it created. In the hush that comes after such heaving, you might prefer to sit with the older women in the kitchen, where coffee cools slowly and a staff leaned behind. The door is not a menace, but a comfort, and the talk is of weather and planting, and prophecy, if it is present at all, is gentle and domestic and uninterested in marching steps. Meanwhile, folklore strolled quietly through the world and seeded new gardens. Novelists let a dream change a chapter's course. Filmmakers put a horn to a watcher's lips and let the sound drag the plot toward dusk. Game designers carved runes into pixels and taught millions to read a future through inventory and quest. Prophecy as pastime is still prophecy. The mind practices anticipating consequences, learns to feel how a small choice ripples for hours, and leaves the screen with a sharpened sense of what tomorrow might do if you nudge it here rather than there. Even in play the old mechanism hums, respectful and patient, content to be learned again by hands that do not know they are learning. And because the century loved measurement, the old narratives met data with a nod. Surveys and early models tried to predict vote and harvest, market and storm, and the public learned a new ritual, to consult probabilities as one once consulted a woman with a staff, to frown at confidence intervals as one once frowned at an omen that felt too thin, and to act on the numbers with the same curious mixture of faith and skepticism that a fisherman showed when a cloud told him to wait an hour. The charts changed design and colour as decades passed, but the day's choreography stayed familiar. Set the sails now. Plant after the rain. Call the neighbour before dusk. A life paced by forecasts it chooses to trust. Knowing trust itself is a way of bringing the better outcome closer. Listen closer and you can hear a more intimate inheritance, one tucked under the skin rather than in books. The brain itself behaves like a small, tireless völva, forever humming predictions and then checking the world against them. Perception becomes the meeting point between a guess and a sensation, and what fits is welcomed as reality, while what does not fit is trimmed, softened, or postponed until it can be filed without pain. You might think of this as seiðr, written in synapses. The ward song here is a prior, the staff a column of expectation, the trance a narrowing of attention until only the anticipated shape is bright. And the result is that you move through rooms already half composed by what you believed you would find. This is why a label works like a mild charm. Tell a child they are quick with numbers, and a teacher's warmth and time gather where the prophecy points. Tell a patient a pill will ease pain, and the body recruits its own chemistries to honour the promise. Reverse the spell, and the nocebo sharpens discomfort because the body is busy making the warning true. All of it is polite, mostly, and practical. To expect is to prepare, and to prepare is to shift the outcome just enough that expectation can take a bow when it is done. The mechanism sits in daily gestures, calling ahead so the welcome is ready, laying out clothes for a run so dawn feels like an invitation rather than an argument, setting fruit where your hand can find it, and discovering that desire often follows the shortest path available. Defaults, which have drifted through these rooms like household spirits, are simply the brain's love of rest formalized. A pre-selected box is a prophecy that says you will go with the grain, and because fatigue is real and attention is finite, you do. Your calendar recurs. Your subscription renews. Your savings move obediently into funds you did not vet, but have come to trust because nothing bad has happened yet. The self nods along because routines are warm. This is not villainy, only a kind of winter management that conserves heat. The trick, if trick there is, lies in remembering that a default is a forecast written by someone else, which means you can edit it the way a careful scold edits a line until it sings more kindly. Recommenders hum like new Norns, offering tomorrow's taste based on yesterday's appetite. Click and the loom spins. Pause and the thread pales. The algorithm does not see fate, only pattern. But pattern served back becomes a meal that trains your hunger until it feels inevitable. If you have ever been surprised by the precision with which a list seems to know you, you have felt a light version of divination's old pleasure and recognition. And in that pleasure is the temptation to outsource choosing, to let preference harden into prediction and prediction into habit. An easy slide on a snow path others have packed for you, while your boots stay dry and your cheeks warm. None of this is a scold. The North never scolded those who kept a primstav by the door, or a pendant at the throat, or a banner at the edge of sight. It simply told stories about what happens when a picture of tomorrow becomes a shared possession. Hands coordinate. Voices soften. Sometimes injustice grows teeth, and sometimes kindness learns to move like a flock. And in the soft hour between lamps and sleep, when your thumb hovers over a small blue icon that will choose a soundtrack for the life you are about to live, you may feel a smile tug because you recognize the old rhythm. A seeress clearing her throat. A staff touching the floor. A voice that begins, quietly, to describe a path you were already beginning to walk with the steady courtesy of someone who knows that the gentlest prophecies are the ones you gladly help to make true. Stone learned to speak in the north. Runestones stood where roads braided and ferries knocked their prows, announcing names and kin like steady voices that did not tire. This one raised by a son for his father, that one by a widow for a man whose generosity kept benches warm. You might think these are only memorials, but the wording often reaches forward. He was generous. Therefore you, traveller, expect generosity from his line. He took tolls fairly. Therefore you, merchant, trust this crossing. The public sentence teaches the future how to behave, and because we are obliging creatures, we oblige. Upland's plains glitter with such stones, and across the water a king named Harold stacked runes at Gelling to say whose land this was and what faith would anchor it. A stone like that is not merely a report. It is a prophecy of belonging, a cue that lets a people step into a posture and hold it when the wind turns. Runic formulae are patient tutors. The phrases repeat, so a passerby can finish them softly under the breath. X raised this stone in memory of Y. Good husbandman, ADGN, bridge builder. The bridge itself often paid for by the memorial, a kindness that turns grief into infrastructure and ensures that feet will choose a smoother path for years. Here remembrance becomes logistics, and logistics, practiced long enough, becomes custom, and custom wears the pleasant cologne of fate. You cross where the stone suggests, because others did and found it sweet. 100 such crossings lay grooves into mud and memory until even a stranger, reading the carved promise, steps where promised feet have stepped. Some stones wink toward the unseen. Binding curses drift along their edges. Whoever breaks this monument may feel the gods' notice. The warning is not teeth so much as choreography. It invites a crowd to disapprove ahead of time, and disapproval is prophecy's favourite tool. A few want to test their luck against a neighbourhood that has already decided what will happen to those who pry at the base of a stone. The result is that memory stays put, held by grammar and fear in equal measure, and tomorrow's children learn their grandparents' names because the rock kept the sentence whole. Stones gather other furniture around them until the landscape itself begins to forecast behaviour. A meeting place develops a regular day. A market grows ribs and returns at the same hour, like a tide. A ferry runs because a rune promised that this strand answers to oars, and soon travellers time their steps to the pattern, and the pattern thickens into law. You could walk against it, of course, but shoes prefer the worn track, and conversation lives where benches are set. This is how prophecy hides in public amenities, in bridges and fords and plazas, where writing fixes not only a memory but a model, and anyone reading the model will find themselves, without resentment, acting inside it. And perhaps, when you tap across the pages of your life, carving little testimonials and profiles that say who you loved and what you value, you feel the stoneworker at your shoulder, nodding as the future curls itself politely around the lines you have chosen to make visible. There is a word in the north for the echo that arrives before the footstep. Vardoga, a forerunner, the sense that someone has already crossed the floor and opened the latch and coughed, though in fact they are still 5 minutes down the path. Households told such stories with a shrug because experience trains attention to hear patterns. A kettle steams at the usual hour. The dog shifts before the key turns. Expectation dresses itself as sound, and the mind, eager to be ready, fills in. You might think of it as a domestic prophecy, so light it weighs nothing, yet it still rearranges a room. Plates laid out a little early. A greeting rising to the lips. A mood tilted toward welcome before the knock. Folk calendars tucked other forerunners into winter. At Yule the first foot across the threshold coloured the year. A dark-haired visitor meant luck, a quarrelsome one meant care, and households nudged outcomes with gentle stagecraft. The right guest invited. The right gifts laid at the right moment. None of this is force. It is choreography that lets a desired future rehearse in miniature. And because the rehearsal feels sweet, people return to it, and the repetition tightens the weave until next December arrives, already softened with a sense of how it will go. Dreams wandered in and took chairs as if they were kin. A fisherman woke with the image of a torn net and patched it before dawn. A mother saw a child stumble on ice and kept him to chores that day, if nothing bad happened. The household smiled at prudence. If trouble came anyway, the household remembered they had been warned and wrapped the warning around the outcome like a shawl to make it less cold. Either way, the forecast helped, not by bending the world, but by giving hands a tempo. In a place where weather held the loudest vote, tempo was often the difference between harm and a long story told later with a relieved laugh. Old anxieties kept a ledger of promises, the way a scold keeps meter. Oaths unmet sour into revenants in the sagas, not because corpses refused to sleep of their own accord, but because communities refused to let a broken vow lie quietly. The draugr that knocks is the future, insisting the past be settled, pay the debt, and the road clears. fail, and footsteps follow where you wish they would not. The psychology is plain and useful. A prediction that unpaid matters return is enough to make payment more likely, and when payment is more likely, vengeance is less necessary, and a winter is kinder than it might have been. You can hear that quiet math in your own habits when you answer a message quickly, because you remember the itch of waiting. A small prophecy about being the person who does not make others itch, guides the thumb, and keeps the day smooth as oiled wood. And through all of it, the home speaks softly to its futures. The primstav mark you traced yesterday tells your knuckles what work to love today. A protective sign cut above the door is a promise to be worthy of the protection. The kettle set out the night before is an invitation to dawn, and you move through these cues like a guest who knows where the cups are kept, steady in the dark, smiling because the house seems to anticipate you even as you anticipate the house. Step closer to our own hour, and you can feel how prediction has changed clothes without changing its bones. A band on your wrist hums that you slept shallowly, and you sip water with the obedience of a sailor, hearing the wind shift. Your calendar brightens a square, and the day leans that way. A recommendation spills new music that tastes like last week's favourite, and your ear agrees, because familiarity is a soft blanket. None of this is tyranny. It is the old kindness of not deciding from scratch. The Norns now wear glass and code, but they still prefer weaving in the colours you have already praised. You might think the magic is gone because the language has grown numerical, percentages, intervals, forecasts that refuse to promise, and yet behaviour answers anyway. A 60% chance of rain does not command a coat, it suggests one, and suggestion is prophecy's most courteous trick. The umbrella by the door is a preemptive amendment to the afternoon, and the afternoon, thus amended, will confirm the habit the next time a cloud looks thoughtful. A model that says, a parcel arrives Tuesday, makes you stock the pantry Monday, and the success of that small preparation convinces you to trust the next model. Obedience and validation. Clasp hands and walk the week together, like old friends who do not need to speak. Defaults sit at the centre of this quiet choreography. Enrollments that keep saving while you forget. Privacy settings that pre-choose how naked to be. A news feed that scrolls as if gravity were moral law. You can edit all of it, of course, but editing takes will, and will is a resource like dry kindling, precious, best saved for real storms. So most of us allow the pre-selected path to become the probable one, not because we are weak, but because life is winter long, and warmth hoarded today may buy us courage tomorrow. The lesson is not to scorn defaults, but to learn the few that deserve the courtesy of your attention, the way a farmer knows which fence must be mended now, and which can wait while the weather has its say. Meanwhile, the oldest stories keep their seats. You glance at a ring, and remember you are someone who keeps vows. You pass a carved stone, and feel yourself part of a lane of feet older than your name. You open an app and see your own past, summarized and offered back as a trajectory, and you smile at the audacity of a machine that thinks it can prophesy your desires when it is only tracing the curve you taught it. The useful part is not its confidence, but your reflection in it. A chance to say, yes, that looks like me, or no, let us tilt a hair west and see what that changes by spring. A gentle, fluent way to remain a co-author of the forecast that would otherwise write you in with too heavy a hand. So the staff touches the floor once more in a room where the light is low and the hour patient, A song you recognize loosens the air. A small, practical future is described in kind words. Buy salt. Mend a net, call a friend, and you find your shoulders easing as if the old house has turned toward you. Prophecy was never only about doom. It was also, and perhaps mostly, about hospitality offered to the next hour, so it will enter sweetly and sit where you've kept a chair ready by the window. What prophecy leaves behind, when the staffs are laid down and the ward songs fade into the rafters, is a habit of arranging life so that tomorrow will find you already courteous. Households that once listened for omens kept right on listening. Only now the signs came as notes on paper, as schedules freckled with saints' names, as market days that returned like migrating birds. A culture learns to prefer rhythms that have proven gentle, and the preference itself becomes a low, persuasive forecast. A woman who has always greeted winter with candles and salted fish will find herself greeting winter with candles and salted fish again, and in the repeating she discovers that steadiness feels like luck. The North understood that luck is sometimes only constancy renamed. Law added its own quiet instruments to the ensemble. The code recited at the thing taught what would likely happen when tempers flared or fields were trespassed, and in teaching likelihood, it channeled behaviour toward the ordinary, which is another way of saying toward peace. Men walked away from provocations they knew would empty a purse. Neighbours mended fences because the song of compensation had been sung so often it felt inevitable. You might think of statutes as secular prophecies, publicly agreed predictions about consequences, and because they were agreed, they worked. The future, addressed politely in advance, answered with fewer surprises. In the corners of this ordered life lingered the old shapes that join prediction to personality. A man who believed his fylgjur walked as a red fox, grew fox-like in craft and patience, and found that neighbours called upon him for matters that welcomed cunning. A family, convinced of the brightness of its haemingja, took risks that darker households avoided and, by taking them, harvested the occasions that make a reputation self-renewing. Here again the loop closes with a sigh of satisfaction. Believe a trait, act in its light, and gather evidence that the belief was wise. Say it often enough at the table, and the children inherit both the habit and the harvest. Modern rooms, bright with screens, continue the rehearsal without embarrassment. A forecast for snow sends a whisper along a city's bones, and salt trucks turn their keys before a flake has fallen. Commuters leave earlier, teachers adjust lessons, bakers pull extra loaves, and by noon the prophecy seems level-headed because everyone has conspired to make it so. One small, plausible picture is enough to coordinate strangers, which is why pictures are powerful. A dashboard that shows a trend rising teaches the hand to ease the throttle. A chart that tilts toward hazard invites 1,000 small evasions that sum to a change in course. You may never feel individually, only in the softness with which a season passes, and underneath it, all the same kindness repeats, that no one really wants to choose every hour from first principles, that the mind, like an old ship, sails best on familiar currents, that a culture which keeps a few faithful prophecies about its own decency and its own courage will tend to live up to them. And if you listen at the edge of sleep, you can hear it, the low thread of expectation running through the day like grain through wood. A promise made to the self that tomorrow will be much like today, only a little better, and that you will meet it with the calm that comes from having already placed the cup, the cloak, the words you'll need where your waking hand can find them without looking. Fear, when it is honest, also loves a prophecy. The North kept its big ending like a winter coat hung by the door, not to admire, but to be ready for weather. And readiness gave the dread a purpose. If wolves will run and bonds will break, then sharpen what must be sharp and soothe what must be soothed, and take your place where you can do some good. There is a dignity in meeting the scheduled dark with lamps trimmed, and you can feel that dignity in the way modern warnings, spoken carefully, move hands without freezing them. A storm track arcing toward a coast becomes a choreography of boarding windows and calling neighbours. A sober climate curve becomes a calendar for planting differently, for building seawalls, for teaching children that thrift can also be a kind of warmth. Prophecy that serves courage tends to carry two colours at once, the tone of endings and the tone of beginnings, stitched together so closely you cannot lift one without the other. In the Edic habit, ash and new grass share a breath. In today's habit, a risk graph and a plan share a slide. You might think this is only rhetoric, but the pairing matters. People do not tire as quickly when the warning includes a way to help. A village that hears not only that the winter will be long, but that the storehouse can be mended and the nets reknotted will stay kind through February, and kindness is its own weather, altering the microclimate of kitchens and workshops until the difficult season feels like a group project rather than a sentence. Even the smallest predictions can teach steadiness around fear. A doctor who says the night will be worst at 2 and easier by 4 lends a patient the strength to hold until the clock's face agrees. A parent who tells a child the first days of school will taste like salt, but sweetness will return after a week, helps the weak accept the child. The sagas are full of such pacing devices. 3 winters, 9 nights. A number that teaches a stomach when to unclench. And if you have ever counted to a manageable horizon while trouble rattled the shutters, you have used the gentlest kind of oracle, the one that borrows time's own beat to reassure the breath that it need only keep time until the drum slows. Of course, the instrument can be abused. A dire forecast shouted for profit fattens panic and neglects the lamp. A bright forecast shouted for favour drains caution and neglects the oars. The old stories keep strict watch on such voices, which is why tricksters often pay for their cleverness when it spoils the meal. The remedy, then as now, is not to stop listening, but to learn which voices have earned the right to set your pulse. Those that accompany warning with work, those that accompany hope with chores, those that make you want to be someone useful when the sky darkens at noon and the gulls go quiet. So the winter coat stays by the door, and beside it a basket with rope and candles and a small, ridiculous charm, because humans do better with a charm. Prophecy here is simple household engineering. A story that tells you where objects live and what you will do when the lights blink and go out. And because the story is already inside your hands, the dark, when it comes, finds you calm and a little amused, which is almost the same thing as brave, and in that soft bravery the hour passes more gently than it had planned. Walk with me into a museum where glass makes old iron behave like stars. A staff lifted from a grave lies serene on velvet, its tip worn smooth from meeting floors, and nearby a small purse of seeds reminds the air that vision once had smell and weight. You read the placard and feel a ripple of respect for people who wanted the future to be less lonely. Down the hall, a runestone's face is lit tenderly, and the carved sentence, once a voice on a road, now whispers between climate vents. He was generous. We were his. Cross. Here, words that once arranged crossings now arrange your breathing, slow and curious. As if by studying the line, you could borrow an ancestor's steadiness for your own half-planned afternoon. Outside, the city behaves like a polite oracle with excellent manners. Trams arrive when the sign says they will. A shop's queue advances, as predicted by the small display that teaches patience in digits. Your phone murmurs that rain prefers 4 o'clock, and you, who have learned to trust this gentle machine as if it were a house spirit, plan to carry the softer coat. You are not bewitched so much as relieved, and relief is one of the oldest reasons humans invited prophecy to sit by the fire, to distribute tension across the hours so that no single minute has to bear it all. Evening brings the old ritual of last glances. The kettle filled, the window latched, the message sent that says, "Arrive safe." None of it certain, all of it prophylactic music hummed to the future so it will come through the door in a good mood. You might smile at your own superstition when you touch a pendant or check a lock twice. Yet the act works not because the world hears, but because you do. The brain, receiving these signals from the hands, eases the watchman at the gate and lets you slip into sleep, where dreams, if they come, will likely be the useful kind that rehearse small puzzles, rather than summon wolves to the field. Far away at the edge of news, a siren sounds, a chart tilts, a projection colours itself more darkly, and the world's chorus of planners wake to their instruments. Storm paths are nudged, servers cooled, levees walked, calls placed, rooms opened, lights kept on. It is völva work with spreadsheets. Coordination disguised as numbers. 1,000 sober expectations held in parallel so that millions of strangers can behave as if they already agree. You are one of them, moving through the choreography with the quiet competence that comes from being told gently what will likely happen. Not enslaved by the picture, but grateful for a picture that asks only for collaboration and offers, in return, a day that feels held. And when at last the lamp clicks and the room darkens to that soft blue where furniture remembers you, the old and the new thread together in your breathing. Somewhere in imagination, a staff touches a wooden floor. Somewhere in code, a forecast reaches its hour and resolves to true or false. And in the small country between those two sounds, your body finds the rhythm it likes best, the calm of having given tomorrow a script that is kind and flexible, the warmth of believing, as Northerners once believed, that even if the great winter must come and the horn must sound, there will be hands on the oars and a voice you trust saying, "Steady now, and steady. We will meet it as we have met every weather that ever tried the door." Choice, like any creature that has lived a long time at a hearth, has learned the language of prophecy so thoroughly that it speaks it without thinking. You rise, and the morning is already narrated. The kettle that asks to be filled, the jacket that has been placed by the door, because last night a forecast said a soft rain would arrive. Your calendar has threaded the day with promises you made to a version of yourself who felt confident and generous, and because you remember her steadiness, you try to live up to it. The North would have recognized this as seiðr of a quiet kind, a choreography of objects and expectations that turns a private room into a hall where futures are invited to behave. You might think agency dissolves under such a spell, yet the old stories kept a gentler lesson. Prophecy was never a steel bit, but a braided rope you could lean against or step off from if you wished to test your footing. The völva sang, and a family listened, but within the song lay many paths. Mending nets is not the same as taking to sea, and even within the voyage, some boats turn home at the first line of dark cloud, while others stay out and try the wind's second mood. Modern defaults work like those songs. The checkbox pre-selected, the route offered, the meal suggested. Each is a ward against exhaustion and a gift of time, and still there is always the small freedom to choose the unlit street, to untick, to ask the day what it looks like without the blanket. This is where the runes return without wood or bone. To name a pattern is to learn its grammar, and to learn its grammar is to find places where a verse can be revised. In an age of recommendations, it can feel rebellious to press and hold until a menu appears, to scroll past the familiar. To choose a new merchant, even when the rating is 1 star lower and the delivery less eager. Little edits like this are the Skold's art brought to life in a grocery aisle or a settings page. A verse smoothed here, a kenning replaced there, so the song still fits the hall but now lifts a different corner of the tent to let a breeze in. Prophecy keeps its dignity, and you keep your hand on the line. Some evenings you will want the old script unaltered, to be carried by a day that knows itself, to let the blue line guide the car while your mind loosens like a sail after hard weather. The North was kind about such hours. Even Odin rested his eye in a well that held answers, and even the fiercest crew let the current help when the tide was right. It is not submission to allow a forecast to spare you a dozen small frictions. It is seamanship. The art of saving strength for the places where strength is needed. And somewhere beyond the next turn, a faint ward song rises from a device in your pocket, as if from a high seat by a hearth, reminding you that while stories like to pretend they are iron, they are more often wool, taken up most gracefully when the hands are warm and the room is listening. Consider a day as if it were a saga written across streets and screens. Dawn is rune carving. You decide who you are by setting 3 small intentions that look like ordinary tasks, but are really characters you invite to walk beside you. Water, a message sent kindly, a jacket mended, each cut on the morning's stick makes an afternoon more likely to be gentle. Then the commute becomes a sea road. Gulls replaced by pigeons, masts by tram poles, and the little oracles flicker. A sign says 4 minutes. A map glows with a green corridor that means, yes, go now, if you follow, because enough past days have taught you that obedience here buys calm later, and calm is a coin everyone understands. At work, the thing assembles. Lawyers would call it a meeting, but the old structure is there. Someone recites law in the form of policy. Someone speaks for the quarter's harvest. Oaths are simply commitments typed into minutes. And prophecy is a slide that points to a number that wishes to exist by year's end. You watch as the room learns, unconsciously, to meet that wish halfway. Small decisions pull like a tide toward the posted figure. A vendor chosen because they can promise speed. A feature trimmed because it does not help the prophecy become itself. It is not sinister. It is coordination, the same warm pressure that let a village survive a winter when the seeress said the nets would be full if only hands kept busy. Afternoon is a pattern of defaults you are grateful for. The door you always use. The cafe that pours the drink that tastes like patience. The password manager that remembers a name you chose 2 apartments ago. Habits click together like dovetails, and the day becomes furniture you can lean on without checking whether it will hold. Sometimes you test the structure. A new street. An unfamiliar bench that turns out to give a better view of pigeons arranging themselves like a tactful army, and the tiny deviation makes the evening open an inch wider, as if the song paused to let you breathe between verses before continuing in the key you like best. Night falls, and the house draws its primstav in the air. This mark for watering plants, this for medicine, this for laying out the garment that answers the weather promised by the small oracle on your wrist. None of it feels like command. It feels like a chorus you join because the tune fits and the words are already in your mouth, and when you lie down, the body continues the old, practical seether of prediction and correction. A shift of the shoulder when the pillow remembers your name, a slower breath because the hour requires it. The loom in your chest weaving a little way into tomorrow, while outside the window the city hums a ward song of compressors and trains, and the quiet, orderly steps of neighbours who have also decided, without declaration, to let the day be made of choices that were kind before they were certain. By now you can feel why Northern prophecies still move the hinge of your choices, not because a god's decree has slithered into your inbox, but because human beings remain the same tender creatures who prefer their futures lightly sketched. A sketch calms and gathers. A sketch saves strength for real storms. A sketch lets a group act as if it were one animal with many eyes. In the old poems, the seeress offered that sketch in voice and staff. Today, it comes as probability and timer, and a quiet recommendation that remembers what you liked last week. The mechanism is old as hunger and benign as a kettle, and yet it is powerful enough to arrange whole cities into a choreography that looks, from above, like cooperation one could never legislate by force. There is a sweetness to yielding to it, to letting a default carry you through an hour that would otherwise ask too much, to trusting a weather report the way a farmer trusts the memory of his own hands. But the sweetness grows richer when paired with the little liberties the sagas admired. The moment you bend the song a degree, choose slowness when the feed urges speed. Choose silence when the chorus offers argument. Choose a path a metre to the left so that a patch of clover you never noticed before has a chance to instruct you. These are not rebellions so much as acknowledgements that prophecy is most beautiful when it is a partnership. Your will answering its invitation, the way a skald answers a melody with a new stanza that still honours the refrain. If you crossed paths with a völva, now she would find your house ready for her. A chair slightly higher, a pendant on the hook beside the door, a calendar freckled with marks that look suspiciously like tiny forerunners you have set for yourself. Water here, call there, leave early because the wind will change. She would touch the floor with her staff and smile to hear the thrum that means a household has learned the art she taught. Hearing a future described, deciding which parts to love, letting those parts become the slope your feet prefer, and keeping, tucked behind your ribs, the courage to edit the line when kindness or curiosity asks for a new word. So the ash still stands, watered in the night by wells that know their work, and at its root sit three, who weave what was and what is with what may be until the threads hum like a city at dusk. Their hands are many now, human and machine, elder and child, ritual and rule. And the cloth they lift is the pattern your day will wear, not a uniform, a garment tailored by habit and hope, You can feel its weight as you close your eyes. Light, familiar, just warm enough, and in that warmth, the loom keeps whispering. A sound like rain promised for morning. A sound like footsteps that have not reached the door. A sound like your own breath choosing, very quietly, what it will believe when the kettle wakes and the window, grey and patient, asks you to rise. If the threads felt familiar tonight, it is because they were woven for hands like yours, old prophecies humming as gentle cues in rooms lit by screens and lamplight. A staff's tap echoing in the small choices that make a day merciful. If this journey through northern foresight and modern habit eased you toward rest, let it keep working while you sleep. And if you'd like more calm, mythic nights like this, please like the video, subscribe, and leave a quiet comment about the sign or story that guides you. It helps the tale find other listeners who need a softer road to morning. For now, close your eyes. Hear the loom at the world's root murmuring, the kettle cooling, the door set kindly on its latch, and let the future arrive at a pace that feels like tide and breathing, steady and sure until you wake.